151, that he prohibited us from eating second tithe when grieving. So they are translating the word aninus. Aninus. Aninus is the state of mourning. This is a biblical state of mourning. Halachically, the state of aninus is the period between when the person dies and the person is buried. We now refer to the entire mourning process as avelut, but and we think of Shiva as the experience of the family after the person dies, but there's really two stages. There's the stage from when the person dies until they're buried, and then there are the 7 days. There is some question. For instance, let's say a person died in the morning and they were buried in the afternoon. So if I remember correctly, according to the Rambam, the rest of that day, that person is still in what we would call a biblical state of mourning. But once that day's over, the rest of the mourning experience is rabbinic. Even though it does talk about the brothers sitting, essentially being in mourning for a week after their father died, but that is like everything that's mentioned in the Torah before Sinai. Those are important stories and may have informed the rabbis when they were designing the mourning process, but it doesn't mean that it is necessarily a biblical notion. We don't have Shiva biblically because the brothers did that. We have this period biblically because the Torah talks about aninos, and here's an example. But you also have Kohanim not being able to serve during aninos in general. So you have a biblical aspect of mourning, but it's much more limited than the system of mourning that we tend to live in our everyday lives. So what we call Shiva is for the most part rabbinic. But this initial point, the point after the person died until they're buried, or at least that first day that the person died, that is biblical. And so it seems like that's what it's talking about over here. So in that state, you cannot eat the second tithe. Even in Jerusalem, until it has been redeemed. And that is, in other words, the only way you could eat it is if you redeemed it, the fruit, onto money, and then you would save that money for afterwards, and then you could eat that fruit because it's now mundane. It's just regular fruit. But if you didn't, you can't eat it during this aninus state. And that is his saying, I did not eat of it when grieving. And the language of the Mishnah Bikurim is that the second tithe, and this was, in other words, part of the conversation about first fruits. Is it first fruits? In 26:14? Yeah. The language of the Mishnah Bikurim that the second tithe and first fruits required being brought to the appointed place. They require confessions. They're forbidden to one grieving. So they both have these rules. And likewise, anyone's grieving is forbidden with regards to all consecrated foods due to this verse, as well as due to it being written in the Torah, and such things have befallen me. And the regulation of this commandment, meaning to say grieving, have already been explained in the 8th chapter of Psachim and the 2nd chapter of Zvachim. And one who eats second tithes or tithes while grieving is lashed. So that would not be a great way to spend your mourning period. Yeah, so again, there are the laws of mourning are their own section. They Many of them are sort of intuitive, not all of them. So some of them um, have like a kind of mystical flourish and result from a mystical understanding of what's going on with the soul. Um, uh, the and maybe some of it being informed, as I was mentioning, from other parts of the Torah, when Avraham more eulogizes Sarah, and when they eulogize and mourn for Yaakov and for Aaron and Moshe. So we have some examples of this, and they form some of our guidance for it. But again, as most of us have experienced, there are all manner of customs and rituals associated with the mourning period, some of which are not intuitive. And when you should visit the grave, when you shouldn't visit the grave, when you should go to the cemetery, not go to the cemetery. There's certain things which people sort of become used to, but yeah. He prohibited us from spending the redemption money of second tithe except for food and drink. And that is his saying, nor do I make use of it for the dead. The language of the Sifrei is, I did not take of it for a casket or shrouds. And anytime he used it for something else, he should purchase food and eat it corresponding to the amount he used. So if you did use some of this for something else, then now, in order to fix that, you should spend the equivalent amount on food and drink, as it explained in its place. However, he mentioned the dead. So why is he talking about caskets on the dead? I mean, that's a weird example to bring. If you're saying that you're not allowed to use it for anything other than food and drink, why are you mentioning the caskets on the dead? However, he mentioned the dead to strengthen it, as if he said, and even though burial is a commandment, he may only spend second tithe monies on food alone. He might have thought, well, this is a mitzvah I'm doing, a big mitzvah. So therefore, it's proper use of the money. No, this money is only supposed to be used for food and drink in Jerusalem. And as he said, and give the money, etc. For if he spent it on something besides food, it is as if he spent it for the dead who have no purpose for it. So this is another explanation for why you would use this example. Explanation number one, that you might think it's a big mitzvah, and therefore it makes sense to use it. The other example is, it's like you spent it on the dead. The dead have no more need for food. So, yeah, okay. Okay, now when we are when we talk about tithes, we again a lot of the laws of tithes overlap with the laws of sacrifices and stuff, because some of them, like the truma, can only be eaten in a state of purity, just like sacrifices. So there are aspects of the tithe laws that overlap with sacrifices, but these are tithe laws that do not. And I'm just pointing it out because we're going in and out of laws that would have only applied during the time of the Beit HaMikdash. These laws shouldn't only apply during the time of the Beit HaMikdash. It could be that they don't apply nowadays biblically. That's not because there's not a Beit HaMikdash necessarily. It's because we may not have a majority of Jews living in Israel. We may not have a Jubilee year. There may be other criteria that are necessary in order for us to for the laws to be biblical. So, for instance, the sabbatical year, the Shemitah year is, like, according to the Rambam nowadays, is rabbinic. It's not biblical. It's still taken very seriously, as all rabbinic laws should be taken very seriously, but it's not biblical because we don't have the Jubilee, and we're not going to have the Jubilee until a majority of Jews live in Israel. And maybe the tribes have to be in their place. There are criteria that have to be in place in order for it to kick in biblically. So some of these laws may be rabbinic, and not biblical. Even some of the tithe laws that are not like Shemitah, like things like the kind of tithes we're talking about, may be rabbinic and not biblical because of those kind of reasons. Again, we take them just as seriously when they're rabbinic and not biblical. And also, we need to know them because when it shifts to being biblical, we need to be very well versed in them so that we can do them properly. By the way, Nachmanides, the Ramban, says this about mitzvos outside of Israel. The Ramban says, obviously, mitzvos outside of Israel are still incumbent upon us and they're biblical. But the Ramban says they don't accomplish what they are meant to accomplish outside of Israel. Those they only accomplish. So, for instance, it sounds like from him, if you observe Passover and you're not in Israel, you are not observing the mitzvah in the way it's intended to be observed. And which means you're not fulfilling what the Torah, the potential of that mitzvah. Why? But you still have to do it. Why do you have to do it? So that when you get to Israel, you're going to know how to do it properly. That's how far he goes, even with biblical mitzvahs, about mitzvahs outside of Israel. But we have a lot of these now because they don't, even in Israel, they may not apply biblically. But part of the reason that we are so careful about them is because when they become biblical, they, we have to know how to do them. And it's possible they could become biblical very soon. That's a thing. Like, for instance, if one of the requirements is a majority of Jews living in Israel, we're getting close to that. We're getting very close to that. I don't know about the tribes being in their place. I don't know how you do that, but the majority of Jews living in Israel, there's a lot of these things which haven't been happening for a couple thousand years that are starting to be close to we're very close to realizing a lot of these, which would mean these tithes and the role of the Kohen and the Levi, etc., become reinvigorated and can reemerge, even before the Beit Hamikdash is fully rebuilt. Some of these things could reemerge, and it's just we're very close. It does not take a science fiction writer to see how close we might be on some of these things. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go to 153 tomorrow. I am very grateful that we got to learn together. I look forward to learning. All right.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I can't remember. I heard it recently. 45% of Jews are now living in Israel. Could that be
Yeah, it's like that.
possible?
Yeah, that's very possible. Yeah, I heard something like, again, how you count this exactly. There might be some political considerations on who's a Jew and things like that. But I heard something like within like 2 decades that it would be that a majority of Jews live in Israel, something like that. And also many of these other things like there's certain things Levim could already be doing potentially that including Levitical require, but also like guarding the Temple Mount and things like that. There are certain mitzvahs that technically they probably could already do. And you see them preparing at the Temple Institute. All right, be well, guys.